Peter Dutton, these FOIs do show the project was on budget and on time, which, as we saw earlier, was not what the PM claimed he told the French president.
Well, Laura, I think you need to put the emails into context. This had been a plagued issue for a period of time. There were cost difficulties. There were key personnel within the naval group that were changed out. We were grateful for that, and a number of issues that hadn't been able to receive attention or be properly resolved were able to be addressed, or there was certainly a process to address them. And I think in that context, the email makes perfect sense. But overall, the decision that we made was in our country's best interest. That's what we're charged with, and it was clear on the advice to us from the Chief of the Defence Force and the Secretary of my department that a diesel electric submarine was not going to cut it, would not provide the defences for our nation into the 2030s and 2040s, and that the only option for us was to go with a nuclear submarine, and that's exactly what we did, and it's a decision I very much stand by.
Well, at the same time, the documents show that the cost overrun that everybody had talked about was not there, that the project was on budget. And it also suggests Mr Moriarty, who's the head of your own department, either didn't know or was keeping his colleagues in the dark about the fact that there might be a change in policy.
Well, Laura, I mean, it's no secret. I mean, the Prime Minister's been clear publicly in relation to this process. This was a compartmentalised piece of work within Defence. There were very few, single digits, in fact, number of people who had access to what was a very high level discussion and decision-making process within the government. We had worked very closely, obviously, on this for a period of time, and the situation in the Indo-Pacific, the direction that China's taken under President Xi, made it very clear to us that if we wanted the best possible opportunity to defend our country and also, most importantly, to deter any adversary from taking any action in the Indo-Pacific, then we needed to go with the nuclear-propelled submarine, and that option wasn't available to Prime Minister Turnbull or indeed to Prime Minister Abbott from 2013 on, but the circumstances had changed for Prime Minister Morrison, and President Biden and Prime Minister Johnson facilitated that discussion, and I think we're in a much better position now than we were under a submarine deal. We have all respect for the French authorities, for the Naval Group, for all of those involved, but in the end the decision we take is one that's in our country's best interests, and I mean, we're just not stepping back from that.
Well, you were at that 2+2 meeting in August. How can these documents be anything other than evidence that the French were lied to at that meeting? And whatever you say about the change in strategic direction, why was it necessary to lie to the French?
Well, Laura, there was no lying to the French. We were very clear in our position. The Prime Minister had made it clear to President Macron in the dinner that they had at the Élysée Palace in Paris that the circumstances for us had changed in the Indo-Pacific, and not for the better. The circumstances strategically had deteriorated quite significantly, and I made it clear in the 2+2, as Maurice Payne did, that the circumstances in the Indo-Pacific, which the French agreed with, had deteriorated quite rapidly over the course of the last few years, and indeed since 2016. I think people were quite amazed by the progress that China had taken and the steps that they had taken to put us on a path of what's really an unstable region at the moment, and we were very clear in relation to that. Now, just another point that's worth making is that President Macron had sent out an admiral, a personal friend, as I understand it, of President Macron's, to make representations to me as Defence Minister, to the Prime Minister and senior leadership within the Australian Defence Force. They knew that there were problems in the contract. They knew that we had concerns about some of the claims being made by the Naval Group, the claims that were being made in terms of cost and the timeliness of the delivery of that platform. And the Admiral came out. We went through the change in the strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific with him. He agreed with that. He didn't agree with our conclusion.
But you never actually suggested the contract would be cancelled, though, did you?
He didn't agree with our conclusion that the work that we needed the submarine to do couldn't be undertaken by a diesel electric submarine, and we were very clear with him that we believed a nuclear-powered submarine, because of the stealth nature of that submarine, was necessary, because the way in which the technologies have advanced, and they will advance over the course of the next 10 and 20 years, will give our adversaries a much greater capability to detect, and in circumstances of war or where there was difficulty, they would have the ability to destroy that submarine. So we made all of that very clear, and I laid out, laid out the difficulties with my French counterpart in relation to the difficulties around the diesel-electric submarine as well. So I think we'd laid pretty clearly out the situation. But in the end, Laura, as I say, mine is not a job to please the French government or former Prime Ministers or other people. My job is to keep Australians safe.
Sure.
That's the Prime Minister's job as well. And we've taken the decision based on the expert advice that is in our country's best interests. And, you know, I think the French have moved on.
Well, whether
you and the ABC haven't.
Well, whether they've moved on or not.
And the Guardian, of course. And the Guardian. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton.
And Malcolm.
Another senior defence official of yours told an industry conference yesterday that, quote, the concept of Australian content is something we do not focus. We do want to focus less on, and we want to focus more on capability. The French deal was based on a guarantee of 60% local content. These comments from one of your own officials suggest that deal is unlikely to be met. That's got grave ramifications for hundreds of companies in Australia and a workforce in Adelaide. What is the position on Australian content under the AUKUS deal?
Well, again, Laura, taking one sentence out of a speech without the context, I think is fairly disingenuous in its presentation. So let me clear it up for you. The situation is that we have developed a very significant industry. The multiplier within the Australian economy, the jobs, the underpinning, particularly during the course of COVID, that defence industry has provided is quite remarkable. And it's a credit to Prime Minister Abbott, to Prime Minister Turnbull, to Prime Minister Morrison, and we'll continue that work. But I want to be very clear. We face a very dramatic turn of events potentially over the course of the next decade or so within the Indo-Pacific. China has been very clear about their intent with Taiwan. They are in conflict with India on the China-India border, the land border. They're in conflict with the Japanese in the East China Sea. They're in conflict with the Thais. They're in conflict with the Vietnamese, with the Philippines, and many other countries against whom they're exerting economic pressure, including Australia, where different contracts have been cancelled, and all of that's been well documented. So for me, we need to get the balance right between continuing to build our defence industry and acquiring capability so that we can be in a position of strength, not
Mr.
weakness.
Dutton, thank you.
And in terms of the jobs in Adelaide, we have billions of dollars invested in Adelaide. Thousands and thousands of jobs will remain and be created into the future, and that's the balance that we need to get. But ultimately, the first order for me is to keep Australians safe.
Speaking of conflict, Mr. Dutton, on another matter, we've obviously seen text messages leaked against the Prime Minister this week. Malcolm Turnbull suggested that it was Colonel Mustard who was responsible. Were you responsible for the leak?
No, and I mean, I'm a Queensland Cabinet Minister. Laura, I know you follow politics carefully, but I'm in Queensland and I'm not a New South Wales Cabinet Minister. And there's doubt about all aspects of this. I mean, I'd love to know what you say about me to your colleagues in your private text messages. To be honest, I don't really care. But, I mean, the reality is that people say things that are exaggerated or heated at a particular point in time. I've known Scott Morrison for my time in Parliament. I see him daily in leadership meetings, in the National Security Committee, in Cabinet, in the Expenditure Review Committee. I can tell you he puts the interests of this country first and foremost. And I think that the petty, discussions put to one side, most Australians see that they've got a Prime Minister who is human like the rest of us, doesn't get everything right, but dedicates himself each day to get us through the realities of COVID. There was no rule book for this. When we were first briefed as a National Security Committee on COVID, we were preparing for morgues at public hospitals, for defence personnel to be deployed to turn people away from hospitals. We had all sorts of supply chain issues. we would have had tens of thousands of more deaths than what we've had today. Economically, without JobKeeper, literally hundreds of thousands of businesses in this country would have closed. They would be in receivership today. People would have lost their houses, confidence would be through the floor, and millions of Australians would have been without any income to sustain their families. So when you contrast that and what the Prime Minister's presided over in recent years, everything that's been thrown at him, 8 premiers and chief ministers at different times, giving him a kick, I think when this race comes down to it, people know they've got a choice between 2 individuals, and Scott Morrison has the credibility and the experience for all of Mr Albanese's time in government and in opposition. Never one day has he spent in an economic portfolio or a national security portfolio, and I think the contrast between the two will sharpen as we get closer to election day.
Peter Dutton, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 7:30's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.